I'll introduce you. This is Anjanette DiCarlo, and she's the Chief Sustainability Scientist at the Aromatic Plant Research Center, and she's the founder of the organization Save Frankincense. She's an adjunct professor at the University of Vermont and a lecturer at St. Michael's College, and an expert on frankincense. So we're happy to have you here with us, Anjanette.
Thanks, Jane. Thanks for having me. I'm just going to switch screens here so that I can pull the presentation up. And let's start in slideshow. Okay, can you all see my screen? Okay.
Yes, very well.
All right, great. So welcome to Somalia. This is probably an image of Somalia that you don't often see or don't often equate with what you read about Somalia in the news, with all the political problems and that they have in their country. But it's an extraordinarily beautiful part of the world. And specifically here, this is a place called the Al Mado, which means Black Mountains. And it's an escarpment that follows along the Red Sea. This is a trail. And so I'm starting off the presentation saying, come with me, let's walk on this ancient frankincense trail where through these forests where frankincense trees grow. This is what it looks like. It's spectacular place. And you can see there's a few guys there walking on the pathway ahead of me, and all the beautiful vegetation in this part of the world being fed by fog. You can see the fog rolling in there from the left, and that's coming from the Red Sea, hits these limestone cliffs, and the moisture drops out. And so in an area that otherwise would be very arid and dry, you have these incredible forests growing along these mountains. So I chose this picture just to kind of start off with because this gentleman here is a chief. And since this is a presentation for seniors, I thought it would be neat to also recognize that elders in Somalia and other parts of Africa where these trees grow are the keepers of the trees. And they have for many generations served as the folks who maintain a balance between not taking too much from these trees and protecting them. And that most of the issues that we'll talk about a little bit with the sustainability is from young folks and not the traditional elders and chiefs. But just another glam shot, I like to call this, looking down the escarpment. You see how green it is. And really that's majority fog fed, a little bit of rain, but really mostly all that greenery you see in what otherwise would be desert is from the fog. So the area of the world that we're looking at are the red dots in the Horn of Africa. And I don't know if, it does, if you can see my cursor, but the photos I was just showing you are right from this part of Somalia, right on the very tippy point of the Horn of Africa. But frankincense trees grow, there's many different species. They grow across parts of India. This is Oman and Yemen in the Middle East. And then here in the Horn of Africa, Somalia and Ethiopia, all the way across this strip just under the Sahel Desert, all the way over to West Africa. This is just another cool ecosystems map. And again, that's the box that I'm showing you quite a lot of pictures from today. So this is a frankincense tree. And if that name sounds familiar to you and you're sort of like, what's frankincense? I remember, we're going to get to that. But if you've gone to Catholic Church, if you've heard of baby Jesus and the wise men bringing frankincense and myrrh to the Christ child, well, here's the tree that it comes from. And I'm going to show you exactly what frankincense is that comes from the tree. But first, I just want to take a moment to honor this tree and how cool of a tree it is, even that it gives us some medicinal product. But in and of itself, it's such a cool tree. You can see how it's growing right on the rock. And many of them are uniquely adapted to grow straight out of rock for their entire lifespan. They can change their roots from the typical roots you'd see on just about any tree into these balls that then adhere to the rock. And they can do this in dry environments, high heat, and live their whole life literally growing on the rock. It's an old species of tree. The genus is about 60 million years old. It is the oldest traded commodity. Frankincense making over 5,000 years of trade routes. It was traded on the Silk Route all the way into China, traded really across the globe in the ancient world and still today. These are the flowers when frankincense trees flower, which is very cool. And these trees are monoecious, meaning that they can self-pollinate. They don't need to cross-pollinate with another species, so their male-female parts are all on the same flower on the same tree, which is pretty cool. And just some more beauty images of this tree, which doesn't look that big. They actually don't. They can get big. I'm going to show you a mother tree in a moment here. But living on these rocks and in these harsh environments, oftentimes they're older than their size lets on because they have a shorter, slower growth cycle being on rock. You can see just the dramatic images of them growing in these really rocky, cliffy areas, which are, as a researcher, very hard to get to. I have to train quite hard to be able to hike and to do science, do research in these kind of environments. And this is a large one. This is a mother tree. This is in Somalia, and this was the largest one that I've ever seen. So I did a lot of work with the community on protection of this tree in particular, being one of the oldest and healthiest trees I've found in my career. And this is frankincense, or this is the product that comes out of the tree. This is what has been globally traded for thousands of years in this form. And in today's market, it's more used as an oil, but this is the raw resin that comes out of the tree. So what is that? Well, you can see it exuding out of the tree, right? So frankincense is a resin that naturally comes out of these trees. The tree does this naturally to protect itself. So the resin runs in channels just under the bark. And if a boring insect gets into the tree or a branch breaks off, the tree will naturally exude this resin to cover the wound, acting like a natural Band-Aid. It also then becomes something that insects can't penetrate. It also has antifungal and antibacterial properties within the resin that, in addition to being a physical barrier, it's also a chemical disinfectant, if you will, for the tree. So it's the tree's immune system. Here is a gentleman tapping a tree. It's very hard work. You saw the terrain. You can see that these guys are hiking and climbing in places that are very dangerous to get to, very difficult terrain. But then they're also climbing up in these smaller mid-sized trees, which in and of itself is dangerous, to tap them. And so I have so much respect for the work that goes into collecting frankincense from the Middle East and Africa in this traditional way. It's been done like this for thousands of years, and it is still being collected in the same way. That's a close-up of a wound once he's just made that with his mingaf, with his knife. It's very, very close to the surface. You don't have to cut very far into the tree to get this. Probably for some folks, can relate this maybe to maple syrup tapping, where just for a little bit of time of the year, you're taking something from the tree. And here's another close-up of a wounding of the tree. On the top, you can see the wound that was made by humans and the resin coming out, and below it is a wound from last year, and that's the Band-Aid effect of the resin. You see that black area, it's completely closed over and healed itself because the resin formed a Band-Aid to do that, and so the tree heals itself from this wounding process. And there is a beautiful piece of frankincense resin. Once the resin is collected, it's tapped, the trees are tapped by men, the resin's collected by men from the field, it's brought into warehouses where it's dried, and women do the sorting. So there is gender division in the trade as it's existed for many centuries. And women are highly skilled. It's such arduous work to separate. You could see actually the tray that she's working on there. Those are some very small pieces. These are specifically for incense, a lot of this going to the Catholic Church. And separating them, that's tough work. It's really tough. I'm not very good at sorting resin. So again, everyone who labors in this supply chain, I have a lot of respect for. And here's just a beautiful shot of a young woman in Ethiopia sorting resins. And I work hard for the girls to feel comfortable with my presence, to be able to get pictures of them and their spirits and themselves rather than just them looking down working. So I really try to form relationships with people when I'm working in the field as an environmental anthropologist and a scientist, and just honor so much the way that people let me be there, and that they really give me the opportunity to witness a small portion of their life, and it changes me so much. This is probably one of the oldest women that I worked with in terms of sorting. She had so much knowledge. She was about 94 years old, sorting resin still. She's teaching the younger women how to do it. I just was so smitten with her. I had such an incredible time being alongside of her for a few days, learning from her. Um, you know, frankincense is traditional uses. It's something that humans have been using for thousands of years. And everywhere the trees grow, people locally and in communities use the resins. They either chew them or burn them, but they use them medicinally. And so this is just a list of some of what it's used for in traditional medicine. Also pointing out that because it was traded from Africa and the Middle East along the Silk Route, it became a part of ancient Chinese medicine. So today, traditional Chinese medicine, which is a standardized form of medicine in China, you can go into a TCM store, into a pharmacy, and buy products made with frankincense, most of them anti-inflammatory, heavily used for arthritic conditions and inflammatory conditions. But the same thing in India with Ayurvedic medicine, also used, and in Islamic physicians. So heavily used, traditionally used in the burning of it being something that, we all kind of have a romantic image of it being burned on pyres in different epochs of history. But there's a real reason for that too. And when you're burning frankincense, it is cleaning out microbes in the air. So it does have an impact on air quality in terms of killing off bacteria and fungi in the air. But it also is psychoactive. So when it's being burned in religious and spiritual traditions for thousands of years, it makes sense when we look at it with modern science and understand the chemistry of some of the components in the frankincense that have an entheogenic quality on the brain, meaning that it alters a state of consciousness. And so it makes sense that our ancestors were burning it in places of ritual and worship. Here's just an artist image of Egyptians burning frankincense in their temples, which was something that was done on a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week, constantly burning frankincense to appease the gods. But there's a historical figure, and this is one of the sculptures of her. Her name is Queen Hatshepsut. And I feel like I know her because she really had a thing for frankincense, and she sent caravans across Africa, bringing back chests, the trunks full of frankincense, bringing her trees. And in fact, she was so into frankincense that within a temple that she built, and I will show you that temple as well, across the walls are these are hieroglyphics and pictograms of the trees, of the collection of frankincense, of the burning of frankincense. And here's an image from the walls of the temple in Luxor of the frankincense trees and the collection of them, and then some of the inscriptions of the medicinal use of the frankincense. And here's the temple. So for any of you who've ever been lucky enough to go to Egypt to see, maybe somebody has been in this temple, you've already visited the frankincense temple that Queen Hatshepsut built. She's also such an interesting historical figure because there were only 2 female pharaohs in all of the Egyptian empire, and she was one of them. So, sorry, that looks a little grainy, but here's the wise men bringing frankincense, myrrh, and gold to baby Jesus. And this is where, for the Judeo-Christians, this becomes much more of a ritual around frankincense, starting with this this act of bringing what at the time in the ancient world were the 3 most precious things to bring to the Christ child, partly because frankincense and myrrh are highly medicinal, and certainly anything you can give to help nurture the immune system of the child and the parents at that time, but also more valuable than gold. So it was also something very valuable for them to have in case they needed money. And the areas where frankincense grow are full of history. This is one of the caves in Somalia where frankincense has been stored for thousands of years, this 12,000-year-old cave art. This gives you an idea of what these caves look like. Kind of stepped back a little bit, and they're all along that limestone escarpment that I showed you. This is another frankincense archaeological site. This is in Oman. What you're looking down into is the well where the water was coming from, and then the city on top. This was a frankincense trading post. So the history is incredibly fascinating in and of itself. I'm very into the trees and the protection of the trees, but the history too also is incredibly interesting to me. This is a museum in Oman that part of the museum is about the history of the trade of frankincense, but this is a frankincense tree in the middle of the museum's courtyard. And within these museums, you find copious amount of artifacts related to frankincense as well. So this is an incense burner or a pyre. This one's back now, we're back in Ethiopia. This is in the Ethiopian National Museum. These were pyres used to burn frankincense. Here's one from a Coptic church, from a Christian church, but it's an Ethiopian version. A Catholic church here in the US would have something very similar, or in Europe or South America would have something very similar looking for burning frankincense in. And this is in the museum in Oman, another pyre for burning frankincense. But today, frankincense is mostly used as an oil. So in the ancient world, the major use was of the resin directly, and now the major use is taking the resin and distilling it, making it into oils, sold as essential oils or in perfumes and other medicinal substances. We are dealing with a very old supply chain and extremely old forests and trees, but we have modern day problems to face. And like many things that we're seeing, we are out of balance with how much we expect these trees to give us versus what the trees can give and be healthy. And so a lot of my work, and I'm not spending a lot of time on this today, but a lot of my work has been the protection of the trees, because when folks are living in poverty, it's really easy to understand why they may overuse their resources. I mean, heck, I would do the same thing if I was hungry and if my children were hungry. So it's easy to understand how folks stuck in a poverty trap could get into a cycle of over tapping these trees to sell the resin. And so we're looking at ways to work with those communities, not blame them, but to work with them to be able to stop this new trend of over tapping, because it does, it can kill the trees, and it does start a process that could be very dangerous to the ecology, because these are a critical species to these forests. So it's just another example of over tapping, too many taps on the tree. It'd be the same thing like with maple syrup. If you put too many taps on a maple tree, it's going to drain the vitality of the tree, weaken its immune defense, and leave it susceptible to disease and death. Doing this kind of work in places that we are in the world, we also end up sometimes getting into situations that we didn't mean to. And this was where we facilitated the rescue of baby cheetahs that were being trafficked through the area. And that's my research partner, Stephen, who's holding this baby cheetah, that we were able to safely get to a cheetah rescue facility. But the poverty creates a lot of problems, and poverty puts people in positions to do things that they might otherwise not do. And so it's where a lot of my energy is focused. But the trees are constantly telling me that there's an abundance of hope in the world. Because look at this little baby tree. Look what it can do. So these are iron-rich rock. They're basically from lava flows, and you can see the little air holes. These trees can start just from those tiny little holes in this hard iron-rich rock and grow. And if the trees can do that and show such resilience and such ability to create beauty out of nothing, pretty much, they're saying the same thing to us human beings about what our capacity is, what we can do, and how we can turn situations around. Being a professor and working with a lot of young students, there's a trend of losing hope with climate change or with the environmental problems that we're facing. A lot of young people feel pretty hopeless, and for me, trees and nature are a constant reminder that there's an abundance of hope in the world. So I do a lot of talking to people. I spend a lot of time, anthropologists like to talk, we like to talk to people. I spend a lot of time out in the field where these guys live and work. I don't expect them to come to me in the Capitol. I don't, the only way to really work on an issue like this is to be where they are. And so I spent a lot of times like this looking very unglamorous, but at my happiest, just being myself, hanging out with people, and working in places that are magnificently beautiful. This is a village in Ethiopia, right outside of Frankincense growing region. And I wanted to include some images today. I was trying not to get too many of myself, so forgive my face for being in some of these, but to just show images of how beautiful people are and how we're all so different, but yet we really have so much in common. And the amount of interest that goes on in each other, and how the children want to touch my hair or feel my white skin or play with our cameras or learn about our equipment. It always makes my heart just skip a beat of how much love is shown to me when I show up in these communities where people are really living on the edge, but are so wonderful to visitors and guests, and they'll literally give me their last piece of food. It's usually a lot of arguing of no, I don't want you to do that, and then I accept because I don't want to offend people. And I honor the contribution of how much work women do, and the kind of labor that women serving their communities, their families, their children I'm just always astonished by that. And as a footnote, because these women were working and they were bringing in wood for cooking, since they were working, I didn't think it was right to take a photograph without paying them to take a photograph because they were at work. And so this was an exchange that they allowed me to photograph them working, and I did pay them for this because they're often ignored, and it's like they don't exist or they're not really there, and the women are the backbone of the society. Probably one of my favorite shots in Ethiopia, this is a group of men. I tend to work really with a lot of guys because sourcing and this kind of work it just ends up that way. And I love this one because here's a group of men not talking about problems or fighting, or they're just talking about this tree that they planted. And so this is a frankincense tree that's fruiting right now. It's creating its seeds. That's why it looks a little pinkish at the tips. And all the men had gathered to talk about this cool tree and that they had planted it and that it had successfully grown. And it was just a beautiful moment to see men from the United States, men from the capital, and men from the countryside talking together around this tree. I also have the experience of people inviting me in for a glimpse of their lives. And this young man, this is sorghum that he's holding. This is a staple grain in Ethiopia. There's sort of a little conflict or a competition for space between allowing the frankincense trees to grow and growing sorghum as a staple crop. And so this young man was growing sorghum right behind his shoulder there. You could see the field of sorghum. And then up on the hillside, those are frankincense trees, the trees that look like they're dead. They're not. They just have no leaves in the height of the summer. Those are frankincense trees. And he was excited. He was offering me this bunch of sorghum as a wedding proposal. I had to let him down very gently because he was way too young for me. But I just meet so many incredible people. And to sit here is really a literal princess. Her father was a king of this area of Ethiopia. In the 90s, Ethiopia became a communist country for a while, and then it went through other stages. But before that, they had kingdoms, which were banned. They were outlawed by the incoming government. So she's not technically by the government a princess, but everywhere we went in the community with her, people would touch her shoe. They would touch the top of her foot, and she would touch the top of their head. She was so well respected. And you can see from that big smile what a lucky person I was to spend a couple weeks traveling through Ethiopia with her. She brought me, we're in the middle of frankincense territory where the trees are growing. And she brought me to her father's compound. This was his where he would see people. Where they're standing is where he would sit when he was serving as a regional king for the area. This was his compound, and this just blew me away. It went underground. It was just incredible place to get to visit, and this was the view out of the back door. So Ethiopia is an incredibly diverse country, very mountainous terrain. So now I want to take you over to Oman for a moment, where frankincense also grows. And these are the same kind of cliffs on both sides of the Red Sea, these limestone cliffs. What's so cool about this picture is you could see it had rained in the last couple of days, and rain was flowing over the cliffs. And so off to the left, up in the corner there, that's an intermittent waterfall coming over the cliffs. And so it was just an amazing moment to see that. And again, like I said, I just wanted to show some beautiful images of the people in these beautiful places. And so this gorgeous Omani robes that the sultans wear, is just incredible to see. I mean, he wears that everywhere he goes. We're hiking these wadis looking at frankincense. This was on his tribal lands, and he's still wearing this beautiful white robe. I don't know how he didn't get it dirty. How Saeed does that, I don't know, but a very stately man. And Ashad, there are two people who work in frankincense in Oman, and you could see those amazing limestone cliffs behind them. Glam shots of trees. This is another frankincense tree. This is in Oman. And so, like in the same light of wanting to share some of the beauty of the people, she is part of the Women's Herbology Association of Burkina Faso in West Africa, where another species of frankincense grows. And her association of women herbologists have a natural pharmacopoeia, an association in Burkina Faso, where they use herbal medicines to treat people, just like an herbologist here in Vermont would help us out maybe with some milk thistle or something that we need, or echinacea during the flu season. She's doing the same thing, and definitely she uses frankincense. So we bonded very quickly over a love of trees and plants and natural medicines. Also remembering, again, like I showed you the picture of the women carrying the wood, these women, it's a little hard to see them because I really didn't want to be too invasive and my security guards wouldn't let me. Underneath those pieces of fabric, there's young women sitting. And what they're doing, if you look closely, they are breaking up rocks. And so they're taking rocks, and all day long, they're sitting there breaking them with hammers and with other rocks to make gravel that they sell for $1 a day, is about what they were making. And all the trees around these women are frankincense trees. And so we have a project on this location now to improve the income of these women, have alternate livelihood opportunities other than breaking rocks, which I was bawling my eyes out at this. It was about 110 degrees. They're breaking rocks. It's, you reflect on how much you have and how grateful you are for your life when you see these kind of things, because this isn't fair. There's a lot of inequality in the world. And to see women working like this, the guys are driving the machines, the guys are driving the trucks and the tractors, but the manual labor, like I said, women are really the backbone of the community in terms of this kind of labor. This is just a beautiful shot. I'm meeting with, these are 2 professors from the University of Ouagadougou and then some guys from the community, meeting in the communities again to talk about how to protect the trees, what are some of the livelihood issues they're facing, what is their community, what's the difficulties, what are their joys, and then always having a good time together. And so I think that might be, yep, I think that's my last slide. And so that's the guys climbing the trees and telling us everything's good. And so I think what I'm going to do here is come on out and stop presenting to see if you have any questions or comments for me.
What percentage of your work is anthropology versus biology?
Gosh, I think I'm more of an anthropologist. My partner, Stephen Johnson, is a biologist. And even though I'm an environmental scientist, I would say I'm a stronger anthropologist. I'm stronger at talking to people than I am setting up transect lines and counting, which I could do. But more of my staff can actually do the biology and the transects. They have a harder time talking to people. And so I tend to use my skills more to be able to relate to people and talk to people than the other part. So probably about a 70-30 split.
Do you have to use translators? How do you talk with people?
I do use translators. The other thing is that I'm an expert at reading body language. And that gets me a lot farther than you would imagine until you read the statistics about how much of our communication is through nonverbal cues, just in general. And so what the body language helps me to, which also changes from culture to culture, something in our culture that means one thing, like come here, might mean go away in another. So I do have to learn some basics of body language. But that gets me really far. And then, yes, I definitely use translators, and usually 2, so that I can triangulate them. Because sometimes translators have a bias, or they don't feel that good that day, or they're feeling lazy, or they don't want me to know something. And so I usually have redundancy in translators, and I don't have them in the same place at the same time, especially because the stakes are very high right now, because frankincense, the genus and the species are all under review by the United Nations for potential endangered species listing and a trade suspension on the trade of the product. And so the stakes are really high. And so I tend to use double translators. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you had 2 security guys?
Yeah. Usually sometimes I'll even have like 2 truckloads full, depending on where I am and what's going on. Almost everywhere that frankincense grows, there's conflict, human conflict. I think in part because of the fact that the trees grow on marginal lands, that they're growing in places that are water insecure and food insecure, that the folks who live in those areas are more insecure themselves. And so they're just more prone to conflicts over the limited resources that they have. So the areas tend to be unstable in and of themselves. And then because I've taken a stand for the protection of the trees, I've made a lot of friends and I've made a lot of enemies. So I've stood up to some pretty big companies, and I've stood up to some very predatory middlemen and people who take advantage of the communities because they don't have the same level of education or understanding of the outside international markets. And taking a stand for them has made me kind of a target for some big players who don't like that. So you'd have to have security in a lot of these places, period. And then I have a little more because of being outspoken. Yeah. Yeah.
So how did you get interested in frankincense in the beginning?
I was working, so I used to work full time at the University of Vermont, and a Somali guy and an American guy about 15 years ago or so came to campus and asked was there anyone who knew anything about working in difficult countries and supply chains and trees. And they were all like, yeah, go talk to Professor DiCarlo. So because I had already been working in Africa and working in combat zones in post-conflict reconstruction, so already having a background in that. It took about 5 minutes for me to be hooked. They started telling me, "Well, we're thinking of, importing frankincense and having a little shop here in Burlington and selling frankincense, all this kind of stuff." I was hooked. I was like, "Oh yes." So it's in the last 5 years as though it's really heated up, because it's estimated at over $1 billion market right now for frankincense. The essential oil market, it has grown so much just in the last 5 years. Frankincense is always in the top 3 sellers of essential oils. So lavender, peppermint, frankincense, tea tree, those are kind of some really big ones. And what's different about frankincense is you're tapping a wild tree. It's not a tree grown in a plantation. It's not a domesticated tree. These are wild forests everywhere they grow, or wadis. And so they're much more sensitive to being damaged or killed because of that versus a crop growing in a farm. So lavender, those are grown in cultivation. And so it's not as much a danger of going into extinction like a non-timber forest product is. So yeah, trees are vulnerable. No matter what kind of tree it is, it's more vulnerable than an herbaceous layer plant to becoming threatened or extinct. Yeah. Yeah.
So what does your Save Frankincense organization do?
Yeah.
How long has it been going on? And
yeah, so I started that campaign about 4 years ago because as we were uncovering threats to the trees and problems, I just kept saying, it just kept coming up, the word save frankincense. Like, oh, we got to save these trees over here, or how do we help save this community? And I said, well, it's a campaign then. It's Save Frankincense. So it had a much longer scientific name that nobody cared about before that. We changed it to Save Frankincense so that it was more, people could kind of grab onto it. And it was started mostly to raise awareness. So at this point, we don't take donations like an NGO or accept money from the public. We're really raising public awareness. And because I work for entities like the UN and the universities and companies who want to try to do it right, I haven't needed to go that route yet to be able to raise awareness. And so the most important thing for Save Frankincense right now is just that education of the issues and raising knowledge about the trees, like their natural ecology. I've just published I think I'm up to 14 or 15 academic papers as of last week on frankincense, as well as for consumers, just, for folks who aren't scientists, but just to understand, like, what is this thing that, I smell sometimes on Christmas in church, or what is that? So yeah. We're planting a lot of baby trees these days. So we're doing nurseries and planting baby trees. So we do take actions as well, but the major thing is to raise awareness.
So what spreads the seed of those?
Ah.
I mean, it's not a dense forest. I mean, they're very far and few between. It's nothing like our forests.
No,
of, say, a maple stand.
Yeah.
But so is it birds? Are there?
Yeah, it's mostly wind dispersal, Nat. It's really mostly just those little pods. They're like these winged pods. Next time I see you, I'll have to show you some that I have pressed that disperse on the wind. But because you're really observant, because the trees are so far spaced apart, I think as the trees are monoecious, they're able to self-pollinate. Mm-hmm. And so they've got that in their back pocket. Like, they don't meet somebody from a different tree. They don't meet some other genetic material. They'll just do it themselves. And so they're really well adapted to either or scenario.
Interesting.
Yeah, it'd be a cool skill to have. I could have just had a baby on my own.
Where's the market? Where is the largest market for frankincense?
Yeah. The largest market would be the United States and Europe. For the United States, it would be for essential oils and for boswellic acid supplements. It's taken, you can go into a health food store and see boswellic acid supplements. It's taken for inflammation and arthritis. So that's the biggest market. Then Europe, it would be less for essential oils, more for perfume and natural medicines for boswellic acids. And then the Catholic Church. So being in Europe, or I know they're their own annex country, but being part of Europe bloc is also for the Catholic Church. And then in China for traditional Chinese medicine, a huge market. So those are three big blocks with a lot of buying power. And so it's a limited resource. The trees only grow in a very narrow strip. These are not huge forests by any means. And so there's a lot of pressure on these trees to give all those different markets frankincense, and quite literally the trees cannot keep up. And so there is a lot of synthetic frankincense on the market. There's a lot of fake. The trees just can't do it. They can't give us that amount of demand. So,
can you tell the difference of the fake and the real?
That's a good question. So we do this little game at the lab at events where we have a synthetic version and a natural version. And I couldn't tell on the lavender, but I could totally tell on the frankincense. And I think otherwise I wouldn't have been able to, because in a lab, we know the chemistry of the resins. You really can synthesize that. You can pretty much take those components and put them together and get something that smells pretty much like frankincense. And a lot of essential oils, it's not really frankincense. It says frankincense, but it's not really. So yeah, I personally have not been tricked by the synthetic versus natural, but I have on other species. So I know that I would be if I just was an average folk, that just know this one really well. Yeah, it's hard to tell. You cannot always tell the difference between synthetic and natural smells.
If they're able to stop the trade in the natural, would that affect the synthetic?
No, it would increase the synthetic market.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. For essential, I think that what potentially is happening with the United Nations is not a complete trade suspension, but regulation and some kind of permitting process potentially where you have to prove that it's sustainable and that the trees are regenerating before you can trade it. So like ivory tusks are CITES listed by the UN, meaning that's the Compact of Trade of Endangered Species. And so you can't just send elephant tusks anywhere, or you can't just ship them you have to have permits and proof that and that's a very delicate one. That's the highest level of protection. Frankincense will probably be somewhere in the middle in terms of protection status, I would imagine. It is threatened, not endangered. We don't want to get too endangered. Like, that's what we're trying to avoid, right? Is, to act now while we're seeing some really alarming and disturbing trends. Now is the time to act to stabilize that so we don't get too endangered. We don't want to end up there. Yeah.
How many cents on the dollar go back to the villagers?
Oh, hardly any. And that's the worst part of it. So we've done some price analysis that maybe 2% of the overall profit made actually goes to the community. And so the treatment of the communities is partly why the trees are overtapped, right? Because they're in terrible poverty and they're overtapping, desperately trying to make ends meet by being given such a low price. So if they make $1 a kilo on what they harvest, that would be a lot, when they should be making more like $6 or $7 on the kilo. The problem is that consumers don't really necessarily want to have to pay what it really costs to have truly ethical and sustainable frankincense. And as a professor, there's a whole bunch of reasons why. Again, not blaming consumers. People's real wages haven't gone up since the 70s. It's hard to pay what things really should cost. And so we tend in the US to really want stuff cheaply. We want to get stuff as cheaply as possible. And so we're sort of at this crossroads in our society between, do we want sustainable and ethical, or do we want it to just be cheap? Like how do we deal with that? How do we not blame the consumer for that too? So yeah, it's very disheartening. We work on some projects to change that. We have systems where I can verify that company X actually paid a living wage to the community. We do that through a blockchain system. And so because I've made so much noise, people hire me to come in and check if their stuff is actually being done right. And so if I can look at a system and say, yeah, this is a really good one, then we want to see those scaled up. And there are some people who are really trying to do it right. There's some companies, some people who really are investing a lot of time and energy and money to do it right and pay the harvesters properly and the women sorters properly, and keep the trees safe. But it's not easy. Poverty makes the world crazy. The disparity between people, to have some people with so much and some people with so little, it makes those two sides hard to work with each other because, there's so many problems going on there. I've had people thinking, I don't know who told somebody once that my suitcase was full of $1 million, and they thought that I had a suitcase with $1 million in it, and I was like, I opened my suitcase for the village. I was like, God, I do not have $1 million in the suitcase, but that's that disparity, that's that unequal, really not a level playing field at all, where because I come from the US, I'm a white person, that I have all this money. So I try to be very aware of those differentials and not blame people for things that poverty causes. I've been stuck out in the field for a few days without food, and after 3 days, I think I would have done just about anything to anyone to eat. You start realizing how going without makes how differently your brain starts to think and function when you haven't had anything to eat or drink, and what that does to people. And so I have a lot of compassion, empathy for the suffering in these communities. Yeah. Every time I come home to Vermont, I literally kind of like kiss the ground out of gratefulness for what I have here. Especially as a woman. And I see those women in Africa or in other places, not just Africa, but just going through so much hardship. And then I'm like, yeah, I can drive my own car here. Sounds like a little thing, but I work in places where women are not allowed to drive. So yeah, you guys asked all the right questions. You're way better than my students.
How often do you get to travel to the trees?
Well, for the last, just until COVID started, for 5 years previously, it was more like, how often did I get to go home? It was more the reverse. So the first time I was working in Somalia was about 10 years ago. And then over the last 5 years, I was with the trees pretty much all the time. Yeah, different countries working, looking at assessing them across the world. So as the COVID slowdown is why I'm home now. And I'm okay with that. I'm ready to take a little bit of a slowdown. Yeah. Yeah.
And Jeanette, have you traveled that whole stretch? Have you gone like, I don't know if there was one in Ghana, an area in Ghana, but from Ghana?
Yeah, I have. I actually have, except for Chad. So I've gone in across Ghana, Burkina, Mali in, and then stopped, and then done that from the other end into Sudan and stopped. So it's just Chad in the middle there that I haven't. Yeah, we have a project right now in Sudan. I was supposed to be in Sudan. I just came from Kenya. I was working on these trees in Kenya. You know, a coup happened. I don't know if you heard that in the news, but there was a coup and the prime minister was taken out of office. And so I didn't cross the border. I went home. So it's a lot of that stuff going on around these trees, which makes the regulation of them and also the sustainable and ethical regulation very hard, you know, when you're dealing with conflict zones. And it's also why predatory people are drawn to conflict zones, because they can take advantage of people and natural resources in these places. It's harder to take advantage in stable democracies, you know, that have transparency or have options of how to have recourse. There's none of that in these places. There's no law and order. There's nobody coming to help anyone out. And so that makes it much harder. And so a lot of companies actually on purpose buy from these areas because they know they can get away with giving them 10 cents, you know, or whatever. I'm just making up a number. They know they can get away with it because there's no accountability. It's a combat zone, or it's a conflict zone, or it's a failed state or something. And so I teach my business students about if the situation is so bad, should your company be sourcing from there at all? What right and why are you there at all? If it's a failed state, if people are being, you know, executed, you name it, right? We've heard of all the terrible things that go on in Somalia. Why do industries buy from sections there when they shouldn't be at all? You know, so it's a bigger question about capitalism, but yeah. Well, thank you. That was
Thank
fun.
you. It's just been fascinating.
Oh, I'm so glad. Yeah, Nat, that was really nice because Nat's a girlfriend of mine and she knows that I travel a lot dues, but she's never gotten a chance to show you any pictures or visuals around it. So that was real treat, Nat. Thanks for coming today. I really appreciate that.
Oh, well.
It's very different than when I usually do a sciencey thing. So this was really fun for me today. Just kind of show the beauty and the people and stuff. So
Yeah.
Fantastic. Great.
Thank you so much.
thank you. Okay. Bye.